Okay, hello everyone that is watching this, because I'm sure that everybody will be. Welcome to a nice little gathering and conversation. I have with me Matt Webb, Mentor Group CEO, James Barton, Mentor Group CSO, not CTO, as I often say. That changed. I get in trouble for that. We are here, gents, to talk about infinite selling.
Yeah.
We originally wrote this book. Well, I say we, I wasn't involved in this. You both originally wrote this book back in 2023. You have now are releasing, upcoming in March, a new edition, an updated revision of the book. And on that basis, I wonder if you could take us back to 2023 and the lead up to writing this book for the first time. What was some of the driving forces behind why you wrote it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I want to take you a little bit further back than 2023 into 2022. James and I have been talking about creating our opinion of a sales methodology for quite some time now, because there's no question that after the pandemic, a lot changed in terms of the way people were behaving. But I'll park that for just one moment. And if you could picture the scene, it was a Saturday morning. I was out walking my dog Dexter. He's a Hungarian Vizsla. And I was listening to The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And a lot of the basis of that is people see life as a sequence of events when actually it isn't. It's a continuation, and things often impact other things in different ways. And as I was thinking, I was like, just describing the word sales in a number of respects, because we often see that marketing have got a function and sales have got a function and then customer success have got a function. The reality is the customer doesn't care. So, from listening to that book, James and I then had a conversation. I'm like, what a great name for a book. We could call it Infinite Selling. And that was really the genesis of it all. And it came from that Saturday morning dog walk and the concepts, thank you, Mr. Sinek, in that book that then started to drive some of that thinking. Of course, what went after that was a lot more detailed thinking about, well, what does this really mean in modern selling? And that's when the book started to come to life. But that really was the genesis of it, Ben.
Yeah, fantastic. I think having read through the book, there's three things that come up quite a lot. We've got infinite selling as well, so I guess four actually. You've got infinite selling as an overarching concept. You've got the infinite selling as a methodology. You've got it as an ethos, and then you've got these attributes of the infinite seller. Would perhaps James, you want to break down kind of the distinctions between these things in an overview sense?
Yeah, so we're trying to think about what it takes to be a seller in today's world. And one of the reasons why we revised the book, we recognized that life changed from 2023 to 2026 because of the introductions of things like AI. But we recognize that there are both attributes that you need to have as a digital seller, and also there's the importance of having sales methodologies that link into how we see selling. So in, many people who are listening to this will understand the importance of a sales methodology. It's very clear through all of the evidence and the research that the organizations that have a sales methodology always outperform those that don't. And I'll clarify that again. It's not just having one, it's having one and using one with discipline that's really important. So when we were writing Infinite, we were very keen to make sure we had the methodology. Now, one of the things that sometimes gets confusing is it a methodology or is it a qualification criteria? And actually, the two are very closely linked together, because you can have a way of selling, but in that way of selling, having these criteria that you have to meet to say whether a sale is a sell or not is really, really important, because as sellers, we spend a lot of time chasing deals which aren't deals. And one of the things I was taught very early in my career, and I know Matt believes in as well, is we should be qualifying out early, because the very best sellers, they don't think about qualifying in, they look to qualify out. So having a set of criteria which drove people to make the best decisions and to have the best amount of time with the right customer was really important. That's why infinite methodology qualification was in place. The attributes were another dimension to it, which was as a seller now, what do I need to be? What do I need to have to make me a effective seller in this world? So having the different categories of attribute allowed us to create a mechanism where we could find out whether you're going to be a right fit for selling in this world, or there are areas where you need to improve. So the attributes are about you as an individual. The methodology and the qualification is about what you do in the process of selling. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, great. I mean, you mentioned in there about qualifying out, and this is something that you both have written some stuff on for Mentor. What does qualifying out look like practically? What drives some of the thinking behind that process?
So practically, if you're a seller or a sales leader watching this video and you look at your pipeline now, I would hazard a guess that some of the deals and opportunities in there are maybe not as well qualified as they should be, and indeed some of them are never going to happen. And yet we spend an inordinate amount of time following up with a customer, chasing the deal, getting to the end of the quarter, and it slips into the next quarter, and it's just a waste of time. So by qualifying out, a professional seller can then spend most of their time really working on understanding at a deep level the customer needs, why they're looking to do the change, why they're looking to do the change now, and improve their win rates by focusing their time, energy, and effort on the right opportunities rather than all opportunities. So that's what we mean by that. And because some sales professionals, they shudder, Ben, actually. They go, well, what do you mean qualify out? They go, well, no, because I want to fill my pipeline and get 3x, 4x coverage. And 3x, 4x coverage is fine. Only if the deals, though, are likely to move through the stages at a good velocity. Deals that shouldn't be there in the first place won't, and it's just a vanity metric then rather than anything else. So that's what we mean by that. So it's really aiming to help sellers have a different perspective and say, if you qualify really well early, then you can focus time, energy, and effort on things that are going to help you and the customer achieve a different outcome. If you don't, then you'll be chasing things which really shouldn't be there at all. So that's what we mean by that. The other thing I'd add to what James talked about in terms of methodology and attributes is one of our really overriding factors for Infinite selling was because we feel deeply passionate that sales or selling is a noble profession. I'll let that sort of filter in just for a second, because, if you go into a school, I imagine, and say, right, how many of you would like to be in sales in future? You're not going to get a sea of hands going up. And yet many people either choose to or fall into sales, and sales doesn't always have the best reputation. But James and I want to change that because we think it should. And when done well, you can really help make a positive difference to buyers, to customers, and organizations on a measurable level. If it's not done well and it's self-serving, then the opposite is true. So we're really passionate about making sure that, if you're having a drink in the pub or you're out for a meal with a friend and they say, well, what do you do for a living? You go, well, actually, I'm a salesperson or a seller. And not to be shy by that or say it behind your hands. Selling, people should be proud of being in that profession. And we're really, really passionate to make sure that is true moving forward. You'll see that as a red thread throughout the book. James, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do just laughing to myself about how many job titles that I've heard over my times rather than the word seller. we all have a different word for it, but the truth is we're in the profession of selling. And as you say, it's a noble profession because actually it's what makes the world go round. It's what creates economies. If people aren't buying and selling stuff, then nothing happens. So it's such an important part, and I'd love to see it elevated to its proper place alongside other professions as well, where we're not ashamed, or our parents aren't ashamed to say, "Oh yes, my son's a seller," because we shouldn't be that way. We should be proud of what we do if it's done properly. And your point though is well made. I think the reputation of selling has been very difficult because of the old school way of thinking around manipulation techniques to try and get people to bend their will. And I think one of the important things to remember with Infinite Selling, this is not a book about techniques of how to sell. You won't find those things inside this book. This book is about selling as a process, as opposed to a self-help book or bunch of tips. Because actually, we believe that if you get the principles right, you don't need these techniques to sell, because it becomes a natural relationship between the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, you mentioned this kind of some old school connotations around selling and salespeople. One of the things that you have highlighted is that infinite selling is trying to bring the sales process to modern selling in some sense, and how sales actually works today. I wonder if you could give a couple of points around where sales has changed the most since you've both started getting into sales.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, the first thing that I would say is that if you look at the research, it shows that a buyer only spends around a fifth of their time with a seller, a fifth of their time, which means 4/5 of their time they're not. So they're doing something else, and they're creating an opinions. And with technology, they can research your organization and understand the pros and cons of working with you very quickly now. So it means that in that time that you are spending with the buyer, and you need to get involved with the buyer as soon as you can by creating an opinion of the change that you can enable. The sooner you can do that in a customer centric way, the better. You've got a chance then of increasing that time that you spend with the buyer, because they see you as a value add, as a trusted advisor. If you don't do that and you wait for deals to come to you, they've done all their research, they've benchmarked you, they've looked at the competition, and you run the risk of being an also ran. So that's just one example. James?
I think, to your point, I was going to raise the 1/5, 4/4, 5th things as well. I think the difference is we now know, as a seller, we have to make the biggest difference when we're with a customer, because of that 4/5, 1/5 thing. So where you were building that relationship throughout the process, you've now got to build it really quickly, and you've got to bring value really quickly. People only buy from people where they see you're adding, again, I'll use the word value, to the relationship. We can't do what we used to do. And one of the things, and we joke about this slightly, and one of the reasons why we wrote the book is when I was doing the research for it, every book that I read on sales methodology started with, well, when I was at a company that's 40, 50 years old, they taught me X, Y, and Z. And that is a problem, because we're still using techniques which come from half a century ago. And whilst it is true to say that a lot of the basic principles are still very valid, the nuances in what we have to be able to do now to add that value as quickly as possible, because we don't have the luxury of that journey beforehand. We've got to get to it really, really quickly. And that's, again, where the qualification criteria, the sales methodology, and even the attributes come in, because we've got to make sure that we are game fit ASAP for every single deal.
Yeah. And you asked earlier, Ben, around, the genesis of the book, and then James, you talked about the fact that 2026, in the last few years, things have changed. So we've basically updated it to include AI. There's no question at all that the modern seller has to be more digitally literate than ever, and to augment some of their processes like research by using AI tools, and not trust wholly what they're presented, because it's not always right. So it's not a substitution, it's an addition to the sales process. So using things like that in the modern way of selling to create those opinions that James is talking about, it's not a choice. People absolutely should be doing it. You can't go to a buyer anymore and say, tell me what's keeping you awake at night, because they expect you to have an opinion now. And that's true probably for the last 10 years, but they expect you to have done your research now and to know your stuff. And of course, AI can be a big help in that, providing it's used right. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
Yeah, and just to riff off you there, Matt, it can also be a massive problem. One of the things that we see a lot of these days is sales slop. What I mean by that is the same generic messages which have clearly been written by AI. And in a world where you need to add value quickly, personalization is key. And when you're seeing just generic presentations which are lazily put together with GPT, it becomes very obvious, and you're not adding value. So it's an important distinction. You said it very well, that AI should be used not as a replacement, but something that augments your skills. Use it for the research. Use it to write the email even, but don't just send it without reading it first to make sure it sounds like you and that you've got some level of authenticity in it. We've Matt and I have both seen email AI generated proposals which miss the mark by a country mile, but the sellers are very, very pleased with themselves. Because look what I did so quickly. It looks really nice and I did it in 5 minutes. Yeah, but it missed the target by half a mile.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely get onto the AI conversation in a little bit. There's a couple of bits I wanted to touch back on. Matt, you mentioned this concept of with the seller having less and less time with the potential customer or prospect. They take on a role as a trusted advisor, and you've used the language before around being a guide and not a dictator. I wonder if you could break down what that means and how that shift works for a seller.
Yeah, a guide is helping someone reach an outcome that's going to be useful for them. A dictator is often getting them to somewhere which is going to be more useful for us. And one is old school, as James was describing earlier, and one is modern way of selling. And absolutely, I talked about this 1/5 of time spent. If you've got a really strong relationship and rapport, and you are a trusted advisor, and you're coming to them with ideas that are going to help them achieve more, and sometimes that can be on a personal level, not just at an organizational level. We will always say that many decisions are made for personal reasons and then justified for business reasons. If you get that level of trust to a certain extent, that 1/5 quickly becomes 2/5, quickly becomes 3/5. Because if they got something, a buyer's got something they want to solve for, and they know that you're gonna support them in a way which is going to help them achieve their outcome, not merely your own, they're going to spend more time with you. So that's what we mean by that. In that, we've definitely seen a trend where, because like we're recording today over a virtual platform, and we had no choice 6 years ago during the pandemic, there's not been as big a movement to spending that quality time with customers in a value-added way. It's not gone back far enough, in my opinion. So, and if you look in your diary, I'm sure you'll see loads of these half-an-hour meetings, and we get straight into business, and we miss out all that relationship stuff first. That still happens quite a lot, but also getting in front of customers. And James and I often have a different opinion on this, just because of our personalities, is also not necessarily happening enough in the right context. I'm not suggesting you have to do it all in person. So that's what we mean by that. How can we bring real value with the customer focus in mind to the buyer so that they trust us, they trust our opinion, we bring credibility into the process, and we help them achieve what we need to achieve. That's what I think really we need to do more of.
Yeah, and I like what you said there about the meeting in person versus digital. And the point, I'll go back to what I said about personalization. We cannot have a default either in person or virtual. You have to meet the needs of the buyer. If you sense the buyer prefers to meet face to face, do that. If they prefer to meet digitally, I mean, I remember you mentioned a few weeks ago, Matt, that you had somebody literally say to you, "Why are we meeting face to face? Why can't we do this virtually?" So we cannot have a playbook that says we will do it A or B. It has to be flexible around that relationship and about the buyer. It's not about our preferences; it's about their preferences.
Yep.
Yeah, and you've mentioned both a couple of times around this idea of a seller only spending a buyer, sorry, only spending a fifth of their time with the seller. What that obviously implies is that they're spending the other 80% of their time somewhere else with something else. And the answer to me is that they're spending the 80% of the time then with marketing materials, where that all of the research they're doing to some extent is driven by marketing. The benchmarking, the competition sourcing is all in some way connected to marketing. So I wanted to touch on this idea that you also touch on in the book of the need more than ever for this alignment and this connection between sales and marketing. And I wonder if you could just touch a little bit on why that's so important now, especially in light of statistics like that.
Yeah, I'll kick it off and then I'll hand over to James. And remember, I always use this phrase, it's always about the customer. So if you look at the marketing collateral and you go, right, well, is this talking about us or is it talking about the outcomes and them being the customer? And quite often it's the former, not the latter. Remember the infinite loop, which you can see just behind me on the wall, it is about the customer journey. They don't actually care, and I say that in the right sense. If they're talking to marketing, a seller, or a customer experience, or a technical overlay, or whoever, what they care about is, I'm working with X organization. Are they going to help me achieve what I need to achieve as part of this process? So the people on the customer, sorry, on the sales side have got to be, and we talk about it being a dance, have got to be working in lockstep together to make sure that everything, the language they use, the way they go about the interactions are always about the customer and they're always about the outcomes that they can achieve. And that's not always the case because you'll get marketing doing something and chucking over a lead and sales going, well, that lead rubbish. I'm not going to do anything with that. Sales winning a deal and handing it over to customer experience with no information about why the customer's bought. So the value realization piece is difficult. It can't be like that. That's what gives companies a bad reputation. There has to be, a seamless baton pass between all of those departments on an ongoing basis. James?
Yeah, no, I mean, Ben, the question you asked was very good because the tagline for the Infinite Selling book is "Sales is dead, long live selling." Because what we're talking about in terms of the Infinite, that is selling. Because sale is a point in time. It's something you do once. Selling should be something that's happening all the time between all elements of the department, whether it's the marketing department, sales team, or the customer success. And we shouldn't be fighting against each other. We need to be working together. So often what you find in organizations is that the KPIs are departmentalized. So you'll have marketing KPIs, you'll have sales KPIs, you'll have customer success KPIs. Now, that's all well and good, but actually they tend to fight each other. So marketing will send over a marketing qualified lead to sales. Sales will pick it up and go, well, that's a bunch of crap. I don't want anything to do with that. That's useless. It's not well qualified. Go away. But actually, from marketing's point of view, they've sent over an MQL, therefore their KPI is ticked. And it's not thinking about revenue, which is the key thread towards all of that, which is where we need to get to, where we're all working towards one thing, which is revenue. So when marketing hands something over to the sales guys, they know it's good enough to be able to go get some revenue on. And then the sellers then take it forward, and then the seller passes it on to customer success. Because if they do their job right, revenue comes from them as well. And that's what we say by the dance, this backwards and forwards, the infinite motion of selling. We often focus so much on the sale part of it, we forget what else happens around us. And sales is without sales, nothing happens. It's true, but actually it's a whole process. It's an ecosystem that makes it work. And we neglect that quite often. That's why when we were doing the book, we were keen to make sure it was a bigger picture. It was not just about the sale, it is selling, which is a process.
And just to add to that, and just to bring it to life in a slightly different way, I've been involved in loads of sales over the years, and you often get that euphoria when you get a sale and the customer says, yes, we're going to go ahead. And you go, yeah, we've got a deal and it's going to help towards a target and everything else. What follows shortly after that is we now need to implement this. So if it was a handover between sales and then somebody else, and that is not seamless, the first experience for the customer after they've said, we want to go with you is not great. Now, imagine if there was a decent overlap between the two in that infinite loop and we win the sale, but we've already got a plan of how we're going to implement it really well so that the customer experience is optimized at every time. That just feels very different. And that takes the full virtual team working in lockstep, as I said earlier on. That's the way to do it, not the other way.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a bunch of different ways that we can address where those gaps start appearing and where the cracks in the process start having people slip through. Is AI one of those tools in sales? I wanted to bring us into this topic of AI where there's a lot of noise in the market, in the industry currently around, I mean, globally around AI, but particularly within sales, but how we can use it about agents and all these other different bits and pieces. What should we be using AI for in sales? And perhaps more importantly, what shouldn't we be using it for?
So, and that is a great question because you've got two people on here in James and I. Digital literacy is one of the attributes of Infinite Seller, and we're not the same. Right? So we're not. It's just the way it is. James's digital literacy around the use of AI is far higher than me. I'm maybe a laggard, so I'm using it in a number of ways now, particularly around customer research when we're looking to win new clients to understand, as I was mentioning earlier on, and then use it to augment certain tasks. I'm still very cautious about it because I'm thinking that there is loads of value in it. I just want to make sure it doesn't take away the meanness, if there's such an expression, by the way, of the way that I interact and build relationships with customers. So, in its infancy, for a less digitally literate person, it's still useful in research, in understanding individuals, in building out proposals, in checking the quality of proposals before they go, amongst other things. James is going to give you a lot more on this.
Actually, Matt, I'm not, because you've hit the nail on the head, really, which is we should be using AI, and I'm going to be I'm going to stereotype a little bit here. We should be using AI for the tasks that sellers are not normally good at. Now, most sellers, and I will use the word most, struggle with admin. They don't like the detail. They much prefer to have conversations with people, etc., etc. This is where actually AI can do a really good job. Matt's already suggested things like doing the research before you get to go and speak to the customer. So really great use of AI. Creating a proposal and checking the proposal, again, a really great use of AI. But that's when the problem comes. And I touched on it before. It's when a seller takes a piece of AI and just copy pastes it directly to the customer without putting that human touch to it. And it should be, and the way I think of AI is like an intern. And I use the word intern deliberately because they're normally very enthusiastic. They come to you with great ideas. They're normally really skilled at something like research, but they don't often have the experience or wisdom that we may have as people who are longer in the tooth and got slightly grayer hair. And we can then bring our touch to what they produce. So if I was going to ask AI to write a proposal, brilliant. It's a great use of time. It can generate it rather quickly. But then I have to read it and I have to personalize it. I have to make sure that it's addressing what I heard the customer say, because AI will go off on a tangent. But to do the admin side of it, so when you close a sale, to run a process to make sure everyone's made alerted and Salesforce is updated, all of those great things should be done automatically, because in a perfect world, the behavior of the seller would then dictate what the AI does automatically. And that's why I talk about agentic AI and how my vision for that is not about replacing the seller. Far, far from it. It's about replacing what the seller doesn't do naturally, so they can focus on what they do brilliantly. And Matt, as is very clear probably from this conversation, is a relationship guy. He likes to build relationship with people and he can relate to individuals. That is something that AI will struggle with I can't see them fixing that for a while. So let's use the AI to do the stuff that Matt struggles with, and let Matt do the stuff that he's really, really good at, building those relationships. You cannot, if you've got 20% of your time with the buyer, don't screw it up by sending a piece of generic AI generated rubbish. Make it hit home hard by building a relationship and something that it connects with them at a human level.
And actually, you're touching on a really important point here, James, because if we ask sellers why they're not spending more time with the customer, they'll say because we've got a huge admin burden. So, and actually we can't do account plans and we can't review them and we can't do research because we just don't have time. We're getting all these incoming requests. Now imagine if you can augment some of those requests using AI with checking them, of course, which allows you to spend more time with the buyer, bringing them relevant and meaningful insights so you can increase from that 1/5. So it can be your best friend if used well, and it could also be your worst enemy if not used well,
Right.
because customers are educated and buyers are educated enough to look at something and go, that's just pure AI. And that's not modern selling. It really
Right.
isn't. So it's AI plus human, not AI instead of human.
Correct.
I'm going to put both of you on the spot a little bit here in terms of one of the reasons that, as we mentioned at the top of this, one of the reasons we did this revision around the second version of Infinite Selling was to include AI in it, because a lot has changed since you first wrote it, particularly around AI. Can you give me an example or two of specifically within the book of where you've added a section around AI to change some of the thinking around the steps here?
That's a really interesting question, because when we were looking to do the revision, my first vision of it was to keep the main body text the same and then have a section afterwards that says, and this is how you can apply AI to
Yeah.
that chapter, that topic. And whilst I thought it was good, the reality was people wanted to see it practically. So in every single chapter, rather than having the bit at the end, what I've done is I've written in how you can apply AI to every situation, whether it's from coaching, from qualification. All of those things now have a red thread of AI through it, because it's not something, and this is where you can really date a book. If I started mentioning how I would write in a particular tool, that tool will be out of date in 6 months. It's probably out of date before I finish the chapter, because the technology is moving so fast. But what you can do is talk about the principles of, and that's where the people's minds need to think, because we've done some work internally where we gave people the AI tool and they looked at it and went, well, what do I do with it? Because it's got so much potential. People get stuck. So you've got to give them quite specific. Think about it this way: what could it do for you in qualification? Can it take an opportunity, read what you've already put into Salesforce, and score it against your qualification criteria? The answer is yes, it can. And so it can be that sounding board. Can it go away and do the research for you before you pick up the phone call to try and find out what the points of interest are and where your solution can overlay? Yes, it can. It could do all of those things, but you can't talk about a particular tool, as I said, because they just go out of date.
Matt, anything from you on that point? Or?
I mean, a really important use case is we talk about data to insight to action. So if you're a manager, a leader on the call, you can sometimes be completely bamboozled by Salesforce or Dynamics data, and you go, where do I start in terms of this conversation? Well, increasingly, AI can give you meaningful insights around, a deal. This deal's been stuck in the stage for a certain amount of time, or we've only got 2 relationships. Our research shows you should have 5. And what it does is it gives a sales leader some of the insight they need to then have a good coaching conversation. So they don't have to go hunting for it or try to, if they're not digitally literate, they don't have to try and make sense of it. AI will make sense of it for them, and that enables them to have a more qualitative coaching conversation. So that's just an example of at a leader level how it can be useful.
Okay, as the last little section of this, I apologize, Matt, for where this is about to go, because it's not necessarily your domain specific. It's more of a James soapbox, because one of the areas where there's also a lot of excitement around use of AI in sales is to do with coaching. And one of the things in the book that you get quite passionate about, I think it's safe to say, and outside of the book as well, is this idea of coaching versus mentoring. And so, as in the first instance, let's just introduce us to the subject of coaching versus mentoring and why that distinction between the two is so important.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I am a bit passionate about this. I think it's because when I did my formal coaching qualification, which I did before I joined Mentor Group, I was taught very clearly that coaching does not provide the answer. So if I was coaching Matt and Matt had a challenge, I wouldn't have the answers. My job as a coach is to find ways to help Matt find the answers for himself. Okay, which is great. However, in sales, most coaches are the sales managers. And most of the time, a sales manager is the best seller in them. That's how they got to be a sales manager. They get promoted because they're really good at selling. And then suddenly they're managing all of these people. And for them to coach a seller, you imagine the conversation, which is, I haven't got any of the answers. What do you think you should do with the customer, Mr. Matt? They're going to go, well, you're the best seller in the room. You tell me what to do. And that's when we end up in a conflict, because the reality is what they should be doing and what they often do is mentoring, which is saying, in my experience, what I've done before, try this, that might work for you. And sometimes we are very polarized. We say you must coach. And actually, you've got to work out when's the right time to coach and when the right time is to mentor. And to use another word that we used earlier, when is to dictate. And it feels a little bit like the situational leadership curve, and it is a bit, but you've got to understand what this seller needs, and you can move it to any of those 3 points in one conversation. So in one conversation, you might have to tell them, you need to do this. So, for example, you need to update your Salesforce records because they're out of date. You need to do it. There's no question. I'm not going to coach you about that. It needs to happen, right? You can mentor someone and says, well, yeah, I had this experience last year with this customer doing this activity and this bore a result. That'd be a great bit of mentoring. And the next bit could be the development side of it. When you said, okay, great. So now what are you going to do? I've always spoken about what are the steps you're going to take. So I think we can be, and I appreciate that I come at this from a very academic perspective, because I guess it was when I got trained as a coach, it was very clear. Coaching is one thing. Coaching is not giving answers. And they're very, very clear about that. So when you see coaching in selling, that's what I think. It's not coaching, it is mentoring. And we need to mentor. We need people like Matt, who's been around the block a few times. Sorry, Matt. To be able to send his wisdom to other people, because that's what they're there for. To say that you have to just coach is wrong, but equally the reverse is true. So we need to be able to have that behavioral flexibility to both coach and mentor, and sometimes just tell people this is a great thing to do. And it falls back to a situation that we've spoken about many times before in our work, which is when the sales leader or sales manager becomes the best seller in the room, it removes the power from the seller themselves, because people will never go to the seller. They'll always go to the sales leader. Now, often the sales leader likes that because they're the best in the room. They're the superhero. They can go fix a problem, but it doesn't generate growth. And that's why coaching, mentoring has got such potential, because we have to learn how to scale our teams beyond the superstar.
A lot of people are therefore excited. You mentioned about scaling right at the end there. They see AI as a way to scale that. So getting AI tools or agents that can provide coaching insights and can provide this different direction. Is that something that you're excited for, or is it something that you want to urge some caution around?
Well, the answer is yes and no. So if we remove my problem with the word coaching and mentoring, and we look at what we know works with some AI coaching tools. We use a AI scenario coaching tool. What it does, it simulates a conversation between a buyer and a seller, and it will generate points where you can improve. Now, it doesn't tell you specifically what to do, but it says have a think about trying to explain something better or connect with something. So it's not giving you verbatim answers. That, I think, is very useful. However, again, what the AI tools are not able to do is understand the nuance of the conversation. And that's when whilst we can really do a great deal of scale with these sorts of AI coaching tools, the manager's input and insight is remarkable. I've seen recordings of these AI scenarios, and you can see what the AI is doing because the AI is working on a set script. And then I've seen a manager make a comment that is so insightful, it completely changes the game. And that's the difference between what an AI is doing, which is based upon a set of rules and criteria, versus what the sales manager can bring to say to do with a human dynamic. We see it also with call recording technologies, which do a very similar thing. So they look at a live call, they records it, and then says this is what you could do better. And then what is a really good use of that is to bring the group together and say, let's dissect this call. That's again what a manager can do to try and bring and share that wisdom across the team. So I'm excited, but we've got to have that human element as well.
So it comes back to this idea that you raised earlier around we can use, when you were talking about content creation, for example, and emails and proposals, AI can do a lot of the generation, but is always going to need this level of human review and human analysis to actually tie it all together.
Right, and empathy as well, because if you're one of your sellers is going through a particularly torrid time for whatever reason, whether that's a poor run of form on closing deals out, or they got other things going on in the world which you can't switch off because we're humans after all, the AI won't necessarily pick that up. A manager should. So that human context is not to be ignored. And that's where you were describing there, James, some of those insights when you see a manager-led conversation. AI is not there yet. It can't do the same thing in that way. So, but imagine if the manager could take the AI insights from what the data's telling and then have a quality conversation, whether that's mentoring, I recommend you do this because sometimes a seller doesn't know and they'll go, what do you think you should do? I have literally no idea. Right, do this. And then we'll review after that. That's really healthy to do, by the way. The other thing I'd just add on to what James was saying earlier in relation to coaching versus mentoring is so many high-performing sellers are made managers, and it's a different skill set entirely. And I think organizations need to do better at that transition and their education of people to become better coaches, because you can. Otherwise, they're more likely to be heavier mentors because they don't know how to coach in the first place. As James, you went through a qualification, it takes time to do that. It is absolutely a skill that can be learned. It's not a light switch though. So you don't just say, hey, you're a coach now, switch the coaching light on and you're a perfect coach. It doesn't work like that because we're humans after all. So, all these things need to be taken into consideration. And what AI can do again is augment that conversation. Just can't take away the human side of it, and nor should it.
No, just to bring that full circle, if we are using AI correctly, the sales leader should be able to leverage AI to give them more time to be able to spend with the customer, rather than doing the admin. Again, as we said, sales leaders are promoted to management, and they're no longer selling. They're managing people. They're doing reports, things that aren't natural to the seller, and that is the absolute problem with the way that we have a sales leader's job journey, a career path is weird. It's very, very strange. But it happens not just sales. You often see another example from my world would be nurses. The best nurses who care for people are often then made ward managers. They don't know how to manage a ward. They want to care for people. Keep really good sellers in front of a customer, not behind a desk doing spreadsheets.
So to wrap this up then, a couple of questions. Question number one, and for both of you to answer, if somebody is reading the book, what is the one, if they could only take away one thing from having read the book, what is the one thing you would like them to take away?
Well, and I'm going to be deliberately awkward with this because I would want them to take the one thing which is useful for them. So because there's so many concepts and ideas in the book, deliberately so, you're never going to take them all on. Deeply passionate about the concept of marginal gains. If we can be 1% better each day over time, that makes a huge difference to myself as an individual, my family, my organization, the customer, and those around me. So I would rather, it'd be an absolute dream come true for James and I that whoever read the book could say, this one point really resonated with me. And if we only sold 10 books and 10 people took one thing away, that's 10 more things than we had before the book. So I don't want to be prescriptive of a one thing I want people to take away, because that's personal to them. I would just love it if they did take one thing away.
I'll go slightly more direct than Matt. Matt's absolutely right, of course. But to answer your question directly, if a seller can take anything away from this book, is to qualify. And there's an old film that talked about selling, and it used to use the word ABC, always be closing. For me, forget that. That's the wrong motivation, because always being closing, you're driving to try and get somebody to turn to your will. My view is it should always be qualifying. Qualify out as quickly as you can, so you're only focusing on opportunities where you can really add value. Now you can use the infinite qualification metrics. You can use other. There's dozens of other qualification criteria, but as a behavior that will improve everything, qualification is the thing for salespeople.
And can I just finish with one other point, Ben, just to answer your question a bit directly, because I know you want me to do that, right? If each person could be just 1% slightly more professional in the art of selling as a result of reading the book, whether that's qualification, and 12 months, 2 years, 3 years from now, we've made a difference in making selling a more noble profession. James and I will go on our merry way into retirement in a number of years from now. Very, very happy.
Fantastic. Final question from me then is, who do you think, outside of the obvious answer of everybody, who would you particularly recommend to be reading this book? Is this specifically for salespeople? Is this for sales managers? Is this for heads of revenue and enablement and these kind of things? Who to your mind, is the key target audience? Not to limit it necessarily, but who do you think is getting the most out of it?
That's an interesting question, because the obvious answer is anybody in the process of selling. Because that's who it was written for. We deliberately didn't write it for leaders. I wanted it to be something that was applicable to any element in selling, and it can apply. I think if we go right back to what Matt said is our real passion, which is to professionalize the art of selling, I would say people who are thinking about a career in sales, if they read Infinite Selling, they would have a very strong foundation to not get caught up in a lot of the other stuff that happens in selling, which is more challenging and difficult, particularly for people like Matt and I, who have got a very strong value set and an ethical perspective about selling. Because you do get people who will get into sales for the wrong reasons, and then they'll get swept up into many different types of behavior. But this should give you a really good grounding about what selling should be. And if we can help people early in their career, when they develop into the sales leaders that we want them to become, then they could spread that wisdom out to their teams.
For you, Matt, or are you happy to co-opt the answer?
No, I'm fully on board. Yes, early in career, anybody who is in any way engaged with a customer, there's going to be stuff in Infinite Selling that's going to help you.
Oh, fantastic. James, Matt, thank you both for your time. Infinite Selling is available now. You can buy it today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Find your digital book provider of your choice. You can buy it as a Kindle version. You can buy it paperback, hardback, wherever you want to look for it. You'll find it. Links for that will be in the description of the video, comments, posts, all of the normal digital practices. We follow them for your benefit.